you're in my metabolic membership program, it'll be in the library, but I'll make it available also to other attendees, and we'll send out a follow-up on how to access the recording. Okay, so welcome to 7 Strategies. I'm going to talk tonight about detox, which really has been a big part of my medical kind of background, and I guess colored glasses to how I look at health and how I look at how to engage and to increase your health. It was a lifesaver for me personally when I was in school. And first of all, I was living in New York City, worked late hours, ate pretty well, but not always the best, exposed to pollution. Then I got pregnant and I moved to Mexico City. Lots and lots of pollution. At the time, that was the most polluted city in the world. And I was pregnant, so I was detoxing for 2. And that was a little bit hard on my body, but I got through it and had a healthy pregnancy, healthy baby. And then years later, went to medical school and got exposed to formaldehyde in the cadaver lab. And we had the school that year, we hadn't expanded to our nice big facility we have now, but at that time we had, our cadaver lab was in the basement with very, very poor ventilation. And I didn't do well. In fact, I got really, really sick my first year in medical school. And it set me on this path to say, oh, this is not just a little thing. I'm not just having some rashes or not feeling my best, but I'm actually migraine, laying down, not able to function, and what's going on with my body. And it brought me down that path of really exploring cleansing. I've worked with patients now for 20 years, working on my cleansing programs and just learning from so many people and what their experiences are. And as many of you probably know, I also do work with keto, and I love ketogenic diet and how it helps with metabolism. I do consider that also a detox program, as we're mobilizing fat and fat soluble chemicals. But I come back to my cleanse program, which I'm going to talk about tonight, as well as my other strategies for staying healthy in our modern world, where we're exposed to lots of things, despite being careful. You can be as careful as you can be, and here we are on the planet. So cleansing to me is really important. It's really basic. It's something that pretty much everybody who's 2 years or older can engage in some level. A food-based cleanse, an awesome way to do that. And I consider it the same as I would maintain anything I own. My home, my vehicle, my clothing, my things that are important to me. I tend my garden and really be on top of that maintenance. And that's what cleansing can be for our health, is being on top of that maintenance and taking care of ourselves. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to start the slideshow. I will take questions and answers at the end. You can put them into the Q&A. I know some people will put them in a chat because it's hard to sort the two things. I'm not using chat for anything else tonight, so that's totally fine. I'll get to those in either place that you put them. Okay, and sharing. And, oh yes, all important devices. Okay. So I came up with this thought, like, we need strategies. I came up with this a long time ago, thinking, well, it can't be just kind of some random something. We actually really need to think about how we are going to live healthfully. And it's become more and more complicated. I think that cleansing has been around for a very, very long time, but with our modern chemicals, it's a more challenging. It's not quite so straightforward, and we need multiple strategies to actually be successful. Okay, let's see. That should work. So, but it's a balance, right? There's so much information coming at us from all angles about our exposure to chemicals and how they impact our health. And I think it's important to be informed and to stay abreast of that information and not look the other way because it's big and scary. But you want to be balanced with it, because when we think about how these chemicals can affect our health, it can be really stressful. It can be very depressing, frustrating. Sometimes I get pretty angry, and we need to keep that balance because we don't want to have the toxic stress either. So we're staying in a place of informed acceptance and making choices. And when you're making choices about some of the things I'm going to be talking about tonight and offering to you, keep in mind that small changes really add up over time. So if you're not able to make huge changes right away, don't worry that any little change you make, when it becomes a habit, becomes exponential over the course of your life and over the course of lives that you're impacting. So your family members, friends, coworkers who may see you living a little bit differently will go, what's up with that person? And I'd like to make that change. And then we have a movement, which not only is healthful for us as individuals, but is healthful for the planet. So it's impossible to avoid all chemical exposures. And that's just one of those things. It's really good to just sit and accept, because that's where it can get super crazy making if we're trying to really live a super clean life. And so letting a little bit of that go and a little bit of an acceptance, and not being so detail oriented and making such hard rules that you can't enjoy your life. And then having the faith in the healing power of our bodies. And this is one of the things we learn in naturopathic school, is that our bodies have this innate ability to heal if we get out of the way and allow that to happen, provide the right nutrients to support that healing process, and avoid the things that are really going to trip us up. And so it's not so much each chemical that we're exposed to, except for a certain class that are very difficult to biotransform, as that process is called. It's more the volume. And so turning the volume down is really what we're looking at, rather than trying to avoid chemical exposures, which is not actually possible. So why should you detox regularly? And people are like, oh yeah, I did a cleanse, it was great. And so cleanse every year. And as I go through this, you're gonna see that some of my strategies, while I'm not cleansing every day of the year, I have strategies that incorporate cleansing into my ongoing life. So currently we have roughly 90,000 man-made chemicals that are in use. Of that 90,000, a much smaller number, 8,000 is what we consider high volume. So those are non-occupational exposures. So we're not getting these from some toxic workplace. People also have those exposures potentially in their lives, but just by living on the planet and breathing and eating and touching our planet that has chemicals in it. That number is a constant. That's why I say approximate, because we've got an average of 7 new chemicals patented daily. So it's very hard to keep up with these chemical classes and exactly what we're dealing with. But we do our best, those of us in the environmental medicine world, to figure that out. Okay, I thought it'd be fun to have somebody else talk for a little minute. So I'm sharing this with you.
We have 80,000.
80,000 chemicals in commerce.
Companies are free to put a chemical on the market with zero information about its health or safety properties.
You look at some of the things that are on store shelves today and you can't believe it.
We have products on the market and nobody knows if they're safe or not, and nobody's testing it because they don't have to.
I don't want to take the chance of buying something that could be really bad for my family.
Well, that's the game. Chances are you bought them already.
Almost all of our consumer products are made up of chemicals, and a lot of those chemicals are harmful.
There are different chemicals, they're in different levels, and it's getting into us in every conceivable way possible.
And so your body is ground zero in the battle over pollution. That's the fundamental change that's happened.
Toxic chemicals that interfere with reproductive systems, that cause cancers, that interfere with our immune systems, that interfere with development.
These things can
all be affected by very small amounts of chemicals.
Well, somehow we have industrial chemicals floating around in our bodies. You think one of those would be enough, but 232, it's kind of hard to say what's going on.
You know, when people start wanting to know about this stuff, when somebody in their family has cancer or learning disability.
People say to me, like, what do we need to fix this system? I say it's simple, everything.
And the concern should be not just about us, but more importantly about future generations.
And these next 10 to 15 to 20 years, you need to do something about it.
There are choices that people can make.
There are things that we can do about it.
Each one of us can be that beginning today.
The difference between a chance and no chance, the difference between some hope and no hope is a huge difference.
Okay, so that was what we're pushing, well, 8 years. And there certainly is a lot more awareness, at least from what I've seen of people understanding their chemical exposures. But I just like, they did that very professionally in 3 minutes, and we can spend less time on the problem because I know you guys already know there is a problem, and more on what the solutions. So I'd like to do a little bit of education. Hopefully inspire you to really get excited about cleansing, and to empower you that you can do this, that it can be as simple as you need to make it to be successful. Okay, so what are my 7 strategies? Here we go. Avoidance has to be at the top of that. So we have to be aware of where it's easy for us to avoid exposures. And that has a lot to do with changing our habits. Daily detox habits. The avoidance is to try to keep chemicals from as readily coming into our systems. The daily detox habits are to open our channels of elimination so that we can eliminate those compounds that may make it in. Rest is super important. We do our detoxification during our rest time, not during active times. A liver flush can be really helpful. It's a very short cleanse, can be done in 4 days. So that's kind of a nice, hey, I can fit this in and doesn't feel overwhelming. Seasonal cleanse, I think, should be done annually. Ideally, it would be done twice a year. Spring and fall are the best seasons to do a seasonal cleanse. The body's just really ready in the spring to let go of that kind of heaviness of winter and move into the lightness of spring. And since we've just sprung, this is a great time to cleanse. And then fall is that kind of getting the body organized and refined and kind of shuttering up for the winter and protecting and getting the immune system ready for the fall, which can be tougher on immunity. We want to imbalance our intestinal flora. So important for our health in so many ways, but really a big part of our detoxification capacity. And then address heavy metals. My teacher would talk about heavy metals as the hairball in the drain. So if we've got a lot of hairballs in our kidneys, so that's the drain. If we've got that metal, it's making this mesh, clogging up that system. And then it becomes much more difficult for us to deal with the oxidative stress from other things we're exposed to, as well as the ability to eliminate other types of chemicals that would be eliminated through the kidneys. Okay, so what do we see with toxic overload? A really, really common classic picture, I would say, on that left-hand side, that brain fog, poor concentration being really big, lots of neurological things, so headaches, dizziness, feeling fatigue, feeling rashes. And, you know, if you have Lyme disease or you're familiar with that, you go, wait a minute, this is Lyme. And if you have chronic fatigue or have been diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, some of these things we're going to see in a lot of these different quote unquote diagnoses. And the truth is that we are now really seeing so much multifactorial disease. We used to say, oh, this is an infection, or this is someone exposed to a toxic chemical, or this is someone who had a car accident, or this is someone who's got a family predisposition to a condition. And now we really understand this multifactorial. So when we see symptoms in that category of common symptoms, we start thinking it's probably not one thing. It's probably the perfect storm of 3 or more things. And so we always, when people have these types of pictures, we always want to look at lowering their toxic burden, and helping them have some more resilience to deal with some of the other aspects of their chronic disease that is causing them to have such debilitating symptoms. And then associated diseases. So when you have toxic overload, developmental problems, and this is a tough one because young people themselves who are having children may not have a very high body burden, not high enough for them to be experiencing symptoms, but it's high enough to cause some developmental programming in that child. So we have what we call the developmental origins of health and disease, and we see children being programmed for chronic illnesses, programmed for obesity, heart disease, diabetes, cancer. Not necessarily that we see that in their childhood, although we may, but we may not see that actually develop until they're in their 40s, 50s, 60s and on, but it has been set up and programmed in utero or even in the preconception, that 3-month window before pregnancy occurs. So that's a big area. I always like to tell people who show up to my talks, I ask them a question. It's hard to do that on a webinar, but the question is, do you know someone who may have a child someday? Chances are you do. And if you do, this is important information. I think we're starting to see how common infertility is, also associated. I don't have it on my short list here. And people are aware of the prevalence of having a child on the spectrum. And so I think we're getting a little bit more awareness that maybe there's something someone could do, and lowering your body burden before you get pregnant. Metabolic disease. So heart disease, our #1 killer, but it usually comes along with other things like diabetes and obesity. And of course, the last year that we've gone through with COVID, and knowing that those underlying metabolic disorders have a lot more risk for having a very bad outcome from that acute illness. We see that with other types of chronic disease when we have these layering of problems. We see that a person doesn't do as well. And so someone in a metabolic illness, so that's really that overweight, obese, diabetic or pre-diabetic, lipids out of balance, heart disease type presentation, when you've got a metabolic disease, then you're in a state of chronic inflammation. And so when we have some experience with some inflammation from chemicals, from an infection, from whatever we're exposed to, that person's already sitting on that edge and they're more easily tipped over the top. And so you want to have that resilience, and metabolic disease just puts you at risk for pretty much everything else down the pike. And what we see is this diabetes, right? Increasing exponentially. And that lets us know that we as a culture are really moving towards this metabolic disease. And then of course, there's neurologic diseases, very common. Certainly even the tough ones like Alzheimer's can be really driven by chemicals in our environment, and that imbalance. Cancer, really, again, multifactorial, probably not in and of itself, but multiple hits, and premature death, which, yeah, is something to be avoided if there's something we can do about it. So this is this interesting correlation of looking at from the 40s, the prevalence of chemical production. It was really a post-World War II answer to our economy and what to do with all these toxic chemicals that were developed for the war. Better living through chemistry occurred, and we started seeing diabetes. Now, many other things in our culture changed, but it's interesting to see that really there's a big correlation between the increase in chemical production and the increased prevalence of diabetes. So what happens? So this is a really famous picture. These two mice, they're litter mates, and so they've got the same genetics, and they they use the same mice for pictures and studies where they use different chemicals. I've seen it with bisphenol A, which is our most famous endocrine disruptive chemical that is estrogenic, that induces obesity. So it's obesogenic. It induces diabetes. So it's diabetogenic. And it induces all sorts of problems in both men and women with estrogen imbalance. So in one story, this overweight mouse here is been exposed to a little bit of mercury during development. And another study, it's bisphenol A that mouse was exposed to. But if it's exposed at the right point in development, it actually programs these pre-cells to differentiate into fat cells instead of differentiating into connective tissue. And so that's what's happened here. And then, just because we have to have a little bit of humor, here's what happens to David when he is exposed to estrogenic chemicals. And it's funny, but it's not funny because this is what we're seeing, right? And so for me as a doctor, I'm saying, wow, it's not your fault. There are these obesogenic chemicals, and it's really hard when you are dialing in the diet, when you're dialing in the exercise, and you're like doing everything you can, and you show up at your appointment, your doctor says, hey, you need to lose X pounds, 20 pounds, 50 pounds, whatever it is, because this is affecting your health. And I'm seeing these numbers, and I'll see you in 6 months, or I'll see you in 12 months. And, you come back and you've done everything, and you find yourself here. So we have to really understand how these obesogenic chemicals are impacting our health and get them out of the body and stop being exposed. So bisphenol A is a big one for that exposure. I think I talk about that later, maybe. If not, I can certainly answer questions about it. So what's in your barrel? There's so much that can be in there. And so when we have to also take other types of traumas, emotional traumas, where we're in this flight and fright, is going to be something that goes in that barrel and going to affect our ability to respond to everything else. Physical, allergenic load, biological overload. So mold is becoming so prevalent and a challenge for so many people. Things that are stored in our body, so endogenous, so things that are in our fat stores, or lead and cadmium that store in our bones. Chemical exposures, exogenous, so from outside of the body, from our food, from our water, from our air, from anything topical that touches our skin. Electromagnetic radiation is getting bigger and bigger challenge because we just have so much of it, and it's just everywhere and more powerful. And there's a percentage of people who are very, very impacted by electromagnetic radiation. Less than 1% have severe, just really can't function anywhere near electromagnetic radiation, whether that's from cell phones, from cell towers, from dirty electricity that's leaking, from just sitting in front of a computer screen, which gives off electricity. And then about 30% are moderately affected. So quite a few people have some health impacts from electromagnetic. And anytime that someone is exhibiting those types of symptoms, we know that they also have that their barrel is up. So this is what I like to think about with the barrel. You can't avoid everything, right? All these things here. You cannot avoid them all. Do your best, but you can't avoid them all. And if you did, you'd be really stressed. So then you wouldn't avoid them all. So think about like having the barrel down to the belly button. So half full, right? That gives you some resilience. That gives you some, hey, I'm exposed to something else and I'm not up to my eyebrows and now it's overflowing and now I'm having symptoms. We see this like the person who is chemically sensitive to their barrel is high and they walk into Target and they forget why they went there, but they're soon wandering out the door because they can't think and they go into that brain fog and just feeling terrible and having this sense of dread that can occur. That's classic because there's so much off-gassing in Target. We also see it in the detergent aisle for people. And so if you're, some people say, oh, I'm sensitive to chemicals. And I say, well, what happens? Oh, I immediately leave the room. And it's like, no, you're smart and you're protective of your health and you don't want to be exposed to chemicals, and you have that smell, that chemical smell, and you avoid it. And that's great. But if you're one of those people who gets a headache, has brain fog, gets fatigued acutely when you're exposed, thinks, oh, I'm a little dizzy, I might fall over, we're looking at a full barrel. And we need to do something to lower that barrel. And so as you look at this list, you can start to think about, well, what can I decrease? What is possible to decrease? And what's low-hanging fruit? What's easy that I could do right away? So we'll talk about those strategies today. So avoidance. What do? Clean water, and not only clean water, but in a clean container. So we have to get away from drinking water out of plastic containers, which is so common. Charcoal filters are generally good for most water. The Environmental Working Group, which is ewg.org, has a water app where you can put in your zip code or your city and find out what is in your city drinking water if you're on city water. And then of course, if you have a well, then that's something that needs to be tested on a schedule. Wash with clean water. So drinking with clean water is really, really imperative. So that's where you put your energy. But if you've got that down, then you can start thinking, well, what am I exposed to in my house? If it's feasible, if you can afford it, a whole house charcoal filter is great. You really only need reverse osmosis for some very bad contaminants. Perchlorates, for example, that's the only thing that takes out is the reverse osmosis, but charcoal filter is great. You can also say, well, I can't really do that. I'm in an apartment or it's not in the budget this year. So you can get a filter for the shower head. You can get crystal ball filters for the bath. One of the biggest exposures that people have is their dishwasher. And so you think about all the steam that's coming out, and that's the chlorine that's coming. So you're getting the chlorine steam. So that's one to think about. You could always choose to hand wash. It's not as sterile because it doesn't get as hot. It doesn't have as much steam. Organic local food. So I really like those two words together, organic and local. Best food on the planet is food you grow yourself. Next best is join a CSA. So that's a local farm share with a local grower who you can just say, give me a box of whatever you're growing. It's going to be very seasonal. It's going to be very local. You can shop at your farmer's market, also usually awesome. And when you're not doing that, eating whole foods with minimal packaging. And people are like, oh, I'm eating this organic little blah, 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 or on keto. Oh, there's this organic keto snack I'm eating. It's so good and it's so healthy. And it's like, well, it's packaged, it's processed, and not good for the planet, not good for you. So avoid packaging whenever, hey, this is a bean. I know what I'm eating. I can see this bean. That's what you're going for rather than something that's been gar gum to stabilize it. Don't buy the almond milk. Soak some almonds and invest in a Vitamix and pop them in there. And, in 10 seconds, you have fresh almond milk that the oils are clean, it's organic, and it's not stabilized with stabilizers that are just fillers. And it's not in a container, which is toxic. So when you do exercise, they've done studies on this, exercising around pollution is actually very detrimental. You're better off not exercising. So you want clean air, natural environment. It has a lot of positive benefits for the nervous system when we're in nature, when we're seeing things that are green. Here in California, I had never really heard of forest bathing. I've been participating in it my entire life, but just getting out in that green and just with that plant. So if you can hike or run or do whatever exercise you do and do that where there is a park-like setting, that's a much better choice and maybe is the only real safe way rather than on the side of a road. So there's degrees, right? But pick the best place. Clean body products. I love seeing this. My youngest daughter was all about putting food on her face all the way through middle school and through high school. And really, as a young adult, hasn't stopped doing that. And that's what you want to do. You want anything that you put on your body, you would want to eat it. If you don't want to eat it, probably you shouldn't put it on your body. So you want to really have food grade, non-chemicalized, because so many of the things like phthalates, big chemical in topical. Anytime it says perfume, that's a phthalate, and a phthalate is a petrochemical. It's fat soluble. It is a developmental toxicant for babies, particularly for male babies, and it's carcinogenic, and it is estrogenic. So we want to avoid all those chemicals. And that's just one chemical that they put in body products. They really have worked around the labeling, and this is changing. A lot is changing. It's going to take a while to catch up. I'm really glad to see that, though there's going to be more transparency than these big chemical names that we have no idea. Is that like coconut oil or is that petroleum? I can't tell. It's this big name that I can't possibly remember all of them. Clean materials. So thinking about wood, avoiding plastics. I mean, so many things are made of plastics. Avoiding the packaging, right? Because we don't really want them out in the environment because everything comes back. Everything washes. Anything you throw out in the sea is back on the shorelines at some point in time. Supplements. So this is the biggest exposure to toxic chemicals, particularly to heavy metals, lead and mercury, is from herbs, hands down. The second biggest contamination comes from vitamins. So here you are, spending good money, taking things for your health. They're probably helping in that way and then harming in another way. So herbs, just because if there's air pollution where there's lead and mercury in the air, definitely where coal burning is happening is a big problem. Those are things that those herbs will bioconcentrate as if it was something like a mineral, like iron. And we know herbs are very good at bioconcentrating all sorts of minerals, one of the benefits that we get from herbal remedies. So knowing the quality of your herbs and feeling confident that you're not poisoning yourself in the course of taking care of yourself. Household cleaners, keep it simple. Bonami is really the strongest thing I use in my house. And, I'm not saying that there isn't ever a time for bleach, but it's not a household cleaner. It's not a day-to-day, week-to-week type of chemical that you want to expose yourself to. But all these things work really well as I don't have on here those chamois cloths. Those are amazing. Who needs Windex? Okay. Remove your shoes when you go in the house. This is a pretty easy one for people to get in the habit of. Once you get in the habit, we're just tracking so much. Wherever our feet went, we're tracking in the house. So if we're walking on pavement, then we're trapping in the fumes from motor vehicles. If we're walking through an area where pesticides were used, we're tracking in pesticides. And so we want to be very careful what we bring in the house. If you have young children live on the floor. They have a very big surface area to body mass. And so they're highly impacted by what we bring into the house. When we do studies on houses compared to outdoor air, we find that inside the house is more toxic than outside. And part of this is this, energy efficient. We have greenhouses that are not very green for people. So very energy efficient, but not so great for human health. So we want to keep the chemicals out of our homes as much as possible. Don't put your phone against your head. Exponential distance, so even getting as far as this gentleman has it, exponentially decreases his exposure to that electromagnetic frequency. Avoid carrying it close to your body at all. You think, oh, it's in a bag. Well, if the bag is on your body, it's radiation. It's not really stopped by the fluff that's in between. So you want to try not to carry it on your body. Put it in airplane mode if you need to. I know we're all like, oh, I need to be on my phone. And I do think about, living in the fire zone. What if I needed to get an emergency alert. So there are times when I will leave mine on at night, but most of the time, if I'm not actually engaging with it, if I'm not working, then the phone is going to be in airplane mode or well away from my body so that it's not increasing my risk. If you can, turn your router off at night. Makes a huge, huge difference. Even better is to get some Ethernet cable and cord your house so that all your devices plug in. You can get an adapter for telephones. I know iPhone for sure. I think for Androids that connect into an Ethernet, so even the phone can be wired. So if you're wanting to reduce your exposure, those are some steps to take. Turning off the router obviously is the easy one. You just have to remember to turn it on in the morning when you want it, and sometimes there's a delay. Cordless phones are as bad as worse than your cell phone. So those are very high, both the station itself and the phone radiate, and all sorts of devices, right? Baby monitors are problematic. So we want to watch all those different devices and say, do I really need a smart house to make my life better? At the very least, work on your sleep sanctuary. So this is the very, very first step. So you turn the Wi-Fi off at night, put your cell phone on airplane mode. You can unplug lamps. So lamps plugged in, it depends on the lamp, but there can be a fair amount of dirty electricity that's coming out of that cord. There's still some energy that's going between the wall and that lamp when it is plugged in, even when it's turned off. Watch what's behind your wall. Is your office with everything plugged in on the other side of that wall? Is that where your electrical panel is placed? And in newer houses, that's often true in the master bedroom, that there will be the electrical panel behind the bed. So see if you can set up your bed so that you're as far away from that electrical source. Or I have my office on a strip that has one switch, and I can just turn off everything. And then I've just got from the wall to that extension cord that there is electricity, but I've turned down the volume of that dirty electricity that can be emitted. And TVs just really, really shouldn't be in the bed. So there's some electromagnetic aspects of that, but there's so many other things that TVs in the room, if we're falling asleep to a TV, or if that light goes on when we're sleeping, that's going to decrease our ability to detoxify. So beds are for sleeping and lovemaking, and that's about it. Well, you can prop and read a book. That's a reasonable thing to do in bed as well. Okay, so that was avoidance. And so that's just something that I like to layer. Like, you're not going to do all of that stuff in one particular day. And I'm going to share with attendees a little checklist that you can go through your house and kind of go room to room and see places that you could kind of clean up. And then you can check off things you've already done and go, yay, I'm doing a great job. I've made these steps. Or you can say, ooh, I probably need to make some changes at home to decrease my toxic exposures, because it's an environment I can control. And when I'm in other places, that becomes more difficult. So daily detox habits. This is really about opening the emunctories. I love that word. It's just such a great, I don't know, it's got a great sound to it. But what that is the channels of elimination. There's 4 main channels. There's other ones, but these are the big ones. So the kidney bladder system, the colon, the lungs, and the skin. And you'll notice the liver is not here. Wait, this is detox. What? What's happening here? And liver's the next step. So this is really like open so things can leave. We don't want to stir up our toxins and biotransform them and do all this work and then not have those chemicals leave the body. So we're going to start with opening the emunctories. And you can do this on a daily basis as well as doing it in a seasonal cleanse. Water, hydrate. Really helps the kidney channel, the skin, the lungs, and the colon. So super important for all of those hardworking organ systems. How much? About 1/3 of your body weight in ounces. So 150-pound person, 50 ounces of water. You need to add for vices and sweating. So if you're doing a sauna, if you're exercising, if you're having a glass of wine, if you're having a cup of coffee, then add an extra glass for those activities. Exercise, so great. It keeps things from being stagnant. So it moves things around in the body. It gets you sweating, and sweating is a great way to detoxify. It is very relaxing for the brain, very resilient. It gets blood flow to the brain, again, making the brain a lot more resilient. So consistency, that's the biggest thing is consistency. These are the things that I see that help with consistency. Move every day. Don't say, oh, on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I'm going to exercise. Think about how you move every day. And if you're not really moving, move more. Get up from your computer station. This is a new habit that I've put in. Every hour to 2 hours, I take 5 minutes. I go outside, I get some sunshine, I mix up the air, and I move my body around. And that is an incredible health saving and detoxifying habit to develop. Plan for the seasons. You're not going to do the same things, light changes, weather changes. Plan for travel, always a time that trips people up. So think about it ahead of time. You're planning everything else. Plan for exercise. And then put it on your schedule. The easiest thing to do is roll out of bed and exercise. So if you can do it then, you're ahead of the game. But if you don't plan on it, the day is busy, other things seem more important in the moment, and suddenly it's evening and you're like, oh, I didn't get exercise in today. You want to have a variety. So a combination of cardio, strength, and stretch. And usually we kind of are drawn to one or two of those. And so you want to get a good mix of all those different types of exercise. Eat vegetables, and some fruits. So a rainbow of produce, all those different colors is so great. Each phytonutrient has its own color. Isn't that cool? So red for lycopene. So, lycopene is important for many things. Health of the eyes for one of them, but you don't need to know that your tomato has lycopene and it's good for your eyes. You just eat a rainbow of colors and you're going to hit all these very, very important. They're cofactors for all these important detoxification and health aspects in our body. Buy organic, and I didn't put local here, but well, I put local, choose local. So organic when possible, local when available, always a better choice. Oh, you used to be able to go to the environmental working group, or I used to think that you could go there and figure out some conventional foods that might be less toxic because they have the clean 15 and the dirty dozen. The problem is the FDA does not, the EPA doesn't require the FDA to test for glyphosate. Crazy. So you don't know, like they may say, oh, this is in the clean 15, but it may have a lot of glyphosate on it because it's not on that list of chemicals that is being tested, so we don't have the database to know which foods are high in glyphosate and which ones aren't. So mind-body healing. The mind is the only limitless organ we have. And it's for healing. I mean, we see these things, right? You've witnessed how people's health can change when we think, oh, this person is doomed or there's no way to fix this. So we have to use that healing power of our mind to really, it's just, we don't have to, but it's just such a powerful tool. Why wouldn't we? It's so powerful. Okay, I love this mental imagery. I mean, this kitten's got it down. This is a really good example of, like, we are all really familiar with placebo, right? If you have good thoughts, good stuff happens. And even if there's no other reason than you thought it would. This is an example of having negative thoughts that spiral, and then that causes health issues. We've seen people have heart attacks because they believe something was wrong with their heart and they push themselves into that. So this requires support, when a person gets in a place where they're having negative thoughts. So it may be not that person who recognizes it, although often it is, but it can also be loved ones who recognize it. And social support. I know this hasn't been the best year for social support. Here we are on Zoom. I used to teach classes in person and I'm doing it this way, but we are connecting, which is good. In the classes coming up, we'll be able to see each other, those who want to do that. These kids, man, this is what kids need to be doing. And we all hope they're back to this without the little things covering their mouths so you can't read expressions. So really, really important social support. And I like to use this with cleansing. That's why I love classes. I love pods, you know, a family pod or group friend pod. We didn't talk about pods before, but you guys all know what a pod is, right? So people to be cleansing together, because it's so much easier and enjoyable when you're doing it with someone else. Number 5, deep breathing. 5 minutes every day and 3 deep breaths when feeling stressed. So that's just, when we're stressed, we hold our breath. And a lot of us just don't breathe deeply. So I like to get up in the morning and take some time, 5 or 10 minutes. I don't spend a lot of time at it because I'm kind of jazzed to get the next thing going. So I'm not like an hour meditator or something, but I take time to focus on my breath and really deepen my breath early in the day. So that sets that habit for the whole rest of the day. And then when I get into a corner, when I have time, I'm like, okay, I'm going to take a really deep breath and try to do 3 of those in a row. And then I really feel more grounded and ready to focus again. Dry skin brushing. So it's like, what? Dry skin brushing? Why wouldn't I use my loofah or my mitts in the shower? And the reason is, when we do dry skin brushing without water and without soap, we're actually flaking the skin off, and you're opening that channel of elimination by doing so. It also has, you know, without even having to think too much about where the lymph flows and all that stuff to the heart and all that stuff, but just that brushing of the skin is going to stimulate your lymph system, and that's cleansing of that channel. And that pulls all the way into, excuse me, that pulls into your vascular system and cleaning out from the skin through the blood, which then goes to the liver and gets processed. Speaking of breathing, I'm going to breathe for a second, drink a little more water. So you want to do this when your skin is dry before a shower or exercise. This is another thing to add. So after you do your brushing, add a little bit of oil to your skin, 1 or 2 tablespoons. All of these oils have been used. You can blend them. You can put avocado oil, but that would be another nice one. Olive oil is a little strong smelling. If you like it, then you can use that as well. It doesn't really matter. It just should be organic food grade. The skin is pretty fatty tissue. And so you're hydrating the skin, nourishing it, and you're also giving some exogenous oil to absorb some of the toxins that are in the skin itself. The skin is a backup organ for the liver for detox. So each little cell in the skin has that same capacity for detoxification that the liver does. Contrast shower. Now this guy's probably doing it a little extremely. Actually, he's probably just singing, but it's cool water. It's not like shocking cold water. So you're gonna take your shower, and then when you're done, you know, with all your shower business, turn the water to cool, rotate. If you have thyroid things, get your thyroid in the cool water. And then after 30 seconds or so, doesn't have to be exact, then go ahead and turn that to hot. You're probably going to go a little hotter because you've just been cool, and then get really warmed up again, rotate through all your skin, and then repeat that. So then you'll do cold, hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold, ending cold. And I know that sounds like, what? Why would I end my shower in cold? It's cold outside my shower. That closes all the pores and actually keeps the heat in and stimulates your body for thermogenesis. So that's great if you have a sluggish metabolism. It's a good thing to do. If you have thyroid issues, it's a good thing to do. But it really is healthy in general for anyone to have that kind of cool rinse at the end of your shower. Bowel movements, have to have bowel movements. If you're not having regular BMs, you're toxic. So 2 to 3 is really optimal. Less than 1 is, you know, our classic definition of constipation, but quality of movements also matters. And so if it's incomplete, if it looks like rabbit pellets instead of a nice log, then you're not using that elimination properly. Sometimes magnesium is needed, sometimes fiber is needed. Those are 2 things to think about. Vegetables is also just great. And then some basic supplements. Unfortunately, the world has changed and we need to support our flora with some probiotics. Doesn't need to be all the time. Soil probiotics, the spore variety, are often a good maintenance type of plan to do. Antioxidants, and that's really to meet the oxidation we're exposed to. And oxidation is not bad. It's a process. We go through an oxidation redox process in our bodies on a regular basis, and that's healthy. We just want to make sure that if we're exposed to a lot of oxidation from chemicals in our environment, that we have enough antioxidants. Vitamin C is a nice simple one. There's lots and lots of choices, but vitamin C is great for so many reasons. Fiber, kind of clean things up. It's kind of the broom in the colon to bind things and put them out. And then a multivitamin mineral to cover the basis of our food sources not being as rich in nutrients and our exposure to chemicals being much greater. We have a bigger need for minerals. If I only picked one, it would be magnesium. If there's like, no, I'm only going to do one, magnesium. Okay, so next we've got avoidance, right? And then the daily detox habits are really to keep those emunctories open and for things to be able to exit on a daily basis. Then we have rest, so important for healing, so important for detox. Rest from digestion, so light and clean several days a week is one way to do it. Slow down. Take a restorative rest in the afternoon. I guess that's been a big pandemic thing when people are working from home and it has increased productivity. So a 10 to 20 minute rest, whether you call that a nap, if you actually fall asleep or you're just resting and breathing in the early afternoon can greatly enhance productivity and just alertness at that time. Meditation. So meditation practice is awesome. And the great thing is you don't have to spend a long time at it. Studies are really showing that, 12 minutes is a really, really good meditation. And if you did 2 6-minute meditations, that would cover it. So you don't necessarily need to do it at the same time. It does not need to be in a lotus pose on the floor. That's a great pose because it really energizes the spine and gets the body very, very balanced, but it could be a moving practice, and sometimes that really works for people. So there's many, many ways to successfully meditate and really allow your body to have restorative rest time. Okay, and then we can do a liver flush. So that's a really quick little cleanse that I do with people. I didn't change the slide, sorry. That's what that slide was supposed to say is now we're starting to talk about engaging the liver and stirring up some of the things that are in storage. So we are basically filtering the water with our daily detox habits and keeping that daily exposure cleaned out. When we do something like a liver flush, we're really going in, stimulating the liver, moving the fat, and helping get those deeper fat soluble compounds out. So you start by eating some healthy fat and more than you would normally eat. Then you take a lipase inhibitor tincture to decrease the digestion of that fat. And then you bind that fat in the intestines with some fiber. You make a nice little fat fiber ball that's filled with the toxins. And those toxins are coming from bile from the liver, which binds toxins and is secreted with fat, with dietary fats. And then you do something to purge that little fat fiber ball, whether that's, the civilized way is to go schedule a colonic, but you can do it with castor oil, you can do it with magnesium salts, you can do it with a home enema or other options. And then this time of year, seasonal cleanse. Love a seasonal cleanse. It's gentle. I like to think of it as a working person's cleanse, and that it's not, it would be so great for 28 days to go off to someplace and be able to enjoy the spa cleanse experience. But this is like, how do I incorporate this into my life? I have family, I have work, I have other things I'm doing. So it combines these 4 components: nutrition, really food-based, with some additional supplements to support all those channels of the emunctories as well as the liver, physical medicine to help remove those toxins, and of course, mind-body healing, to use that healing power of intention that we have. So when we do something with intention, it is much, much more powerful. So here's one of my books that I wrote. I wrote this with Dr. Rod, and we ran these big cleanse classes in Ashland for years and years, 2008 through 2016. And this is the workbook for that. So this I designed because I got tired of giving handouts to people for doing cleanses. So it's got all the instructions, the nutrition, the how to do a home enema, et cetera, et cetera. First thing you're going to do is nutrition. So you want to eat very clean foods. The whole foods, again, that bean, you know what a bean is. It's not something in a package that you know, says it's all organic and natural and blah, 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 blah. It's actually real food. Organic as much as possible and local, of course, with that when you can. And it is a hypoallergenic, anti-inflammatory diet. So we look at some of the foods that are very inflammatory. Top 3, gluten, eggs, and dairy. So they're the most common, but we also take out tree nuts and citrus and nightshades and corn and soy. So you have your 8 kind of food groups that are the most likely to cause inflammation or to cause an allergenic response. This is my first book with Chef Jeff, who healed himself of diabetes with nutrition. This is my guide to write the recipes for the Cleanse Cookbook and keep me from telling people how to cook lentils. I got really burned out on that. I think the lentils was like, that was the final straw when some guy said, yeah, I'm cooking lentils. I put lentils with water and salt in a pan. I'm like, oh my God, it's got to get better than this. And I can't be the person to say that yet again. So I love this. Rod and I always talked about before and after the cookbook, because it just changed our lives in helping people detoxify, to have that cookbook, that everything in it not only is allowable on a cleansed diet, but also has a lot of herbs and spices that support the cleansing process. So very food-based. Here's a few of the recipes. There'll be a little tip on what that detox is doing, and then some instructions, what your food list is, and there is a shopping list in the back. So for a self-run cleanse, I do really encourage getting these 2 books, you know, and doing it on your own. I've had lots and lots of people do that with great success. Or you could just eat a really clean diet. That's also a great, great cleanse, is just clean up the diet completely. Okay, so the supplements are really to support and eliminate toxins for liver, kidney, bowel, to help your detox process, so that the liver really has the nutrients, the cofactors that it needs. The kidney, it's more about herbs to really help with moving things through that channel easily. The bowel scrubbers, that's usually fiber, but we can look at clay, charcoal. We want to get that good flora in, because our flora is so much part of our detox capacity, that flora actually biotransforms chemicals in our guts. And then we need some antioxidants, especially if we're doing some stirring up of some chemicals that maybe have been in storage for a while. We want to make sure we're not harming ourselves in the course of cleansing. So here's a picture of the kit I used to use in the fun little bag from days gone by. So opening the emunctories, those channels of elimination, we really want to work on that. The daily detox habits, you know, if that's what you've got time for, I often just say, hey, the more of those you can do, if you can do this list of the daily detox habits, that's great. But if you've got more time, colon hydrotherapy. So this is an open system with my friend Helen from Ashland. And they also have a closed system, or you can do a home enema. So there are all these therapies I'm talking about in the Cleanse workbook. They're, the home version is explained so that you can do home therapy. And of course, in this transitional time, it's often hard to get in and get physical medicine from a practitioner. Sauna. If you only did one thing, sauna, 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 sauna. So like, just like magnesium is the one supplement, I would say that sauna is the one physical medicine that is the most powerful. Almost every, not all, but almost every chemical is excreted in sweat, including toxic metals. And so not only the fat soluble ones, but also some things that we wouldn't necessarily think would come out in our sweat. Of course, it takes many, many, many sweats. We're talking drops, there may be buckets. So it's an ongoing thing. So if you have the ability, you know, if you own your house and you're maintaining your house and you're doing cool things to your house, get a sauna. There's two companies I really like, Sauna Ray and Heavenly Heat are my favorite two sauna companies who use clean building material and low electromagnetic. A steam soak, so this is great as long as you're steaming in non-chlorinated water. So a lot of gyms will have a nice steam room, but they don't have a whole facility water filter. So you're getting chlorine, so you're probably getting more toxic. This was at the clinic I worked at in Ashland, and we did have a whole, actually all these pictures are from there. We had this great detox center that I was very honored to help design. Yoga is awesome. It's a lot about breath, so you're working your lungs. It's a lot about stretching so that you're moving toxins that can store in muscle tissue, as well as engaging mind-body healing. So same thing here. We're looking at mental imagery, social support, emotional healing to the degree that a person would need that. And I would say in the seasonal cleanse, in week 2, this is where we go deep into this system. And I like to warn people that you may be more emotional and more tearful, but not know why. There might be rising liver chi, which is anger. There might be relationship, this stuff that's up. So it's good to have that conversation with your loved ones that you're living with when you're cleansing, and then remind yourself and everyone else to be gentle and supportive for this process, because you're having an emotional purge. And so recognize it at that, make sure you're not pointing it at anyone, and have them understand that this is your healing process so that they're not taking it personally, so you make it safe for everybody involved. Okay, so after the seasonal cleanse, we really look to balance the intestinal flora. You've changed the nutrition a lot, so it's a great time to get in there and really say, how is the bowel functioning? Now that I've been doing fiber and probiotics and whole foods, is there still some balancing that I need to do in the system? Because things might have gotten better in that 28 days when you're in a much better dietary habits. And if they're not, then something may be off in that system. You want to treat the terrain. So the terrain, it's like if you can't grow a garden without good soil. And so you can't have good flora without a healthy terrain that has the right pH, that has the right flora, friendly flora that's around. That's when we take flora, is to support our nascent flora with these friendlies that we take as a supplement. We want to balance the bacteria. Sometimes there's overgrowth that we actually have to get in there and work on. We can do that herbally, generally speaking, reduce any overgrowth of yeast, and certainly treat any parasites that have become resident. So there's some work that can be done. And I just like to look at this like after a cleanse, because anytime we do something really basic, like cleansing, I think it was really basic, we are changing that terrain. And changing that terrain can dramatically change our health. And that may be all you need to do. And sometimes we go top down, we're like, oh, let's get a $300 stool test and blah, 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 and take all these herbs and take all these supplements. And, you know, we're doing that, and we're doing that, and we're doing that. And we're forcing this in bad soil. And we didn't really work on that terrain first. And a cleanse, I think, is a great way. We're getting off of simple, refined foods. That's huge impact on our flora. We're hydrating, also super, super important. And we're taking that time. I think that's the other thing that I love about the seasonal cleanse, is how focused it is on self-care. And so you're having that engagement of that mind-body approach, because you're engaged in caring for yourself. You're giving yourself permission for self-care. And especially for moms, dads are a little better at self-care, honestly, in what I've seen in my years of practice. Moms can get just terrible at self-care. And then that can persist long after the kids have left the house and they're still terrible at self-care because they don't give themselves the permission. So this is an opportunity to do so. So I kind of did a backward slide there on this bacteria, but it reminded me of how we create an environment for healing. Okay, and then the seventh strategy is to address the heavy metals, because if you have a high body burden, even if you're saunaing regularly, even if your liver has all the cofactors it needs for binding and eliminating metals, it's hard to get ahead. And that's just going to impact all these other aspects of your health and your ability to detox. Remember it being the hairball in the drain. So just a few, there's so many things associated with these chemicals, but we definitely, cadmium's going up. I'm seeing it at much higher levels in people, which is frustrating. It's probably because of the mines that are starting to collapse, that are, you know, they got the ore they wanted out and then they left those, oh, what do you call them? Yeah, tunnels, but there's a better word. They left that there, and there can be some other metals there. Cadmium and arsenic are the two big ones that we see. And so when that collapse happens, if there's water running through it, it's washing all those metals downstream. Remember the Animas River when it turned bright red or just red. And that, of course, flows into the Colorado, which waters our basket in the Central Valley of California. And so we are having increased exposure to cadmium. I don't have on here kidney disease, but that is one of the highest increasing in prevalence chronic diseases that we have currently. Is chronic kidney disease is becoming much, much more common. And we're seeing it really in practice way, way too often. And cadmium is a very big, all of these are kidney toxins, but cadmium is particularly oxidative for the kidneys. Mercury stores in the kidneys. That's its favorite place to store. Cadmium and lead you're going to see in bone tissue. So that can be, cadmium and lead can be this issue with aging. And so as if people are getting osteoporosis and they're having a lot of bone loss, there's a lot of mobilization of this endogenous, you know, inside our systems, toxicant. And so that's the exposure. It's not from the environment anymore, but it's from years gone by. And what we see is we definitely see a lot less lead in children. It's the it's our poster child of the 90,000 chemicals out there. And even like the 200 and whatever, now we're up to 230, I think that we test for, the CDC tests for, lead is the only one that's really gone down in our environment. And so we see problems with lead more often in older people who were exposed to lead paint and lead gasoline, and less in the younger folks. Lead is such a big neurotoxin. That's what it's really known for, not that it can't cause other problems in the body. Both lead and mercury are also drivers of obesity and metabolic syndrome. So again, it's like, well, you know, what chemicals in our bodies are really taking over our messaging system, which is what our hormonal or our endocrine system is it sends messages. If we got lead and mercury in there, sending all these messages to become obesogenic, to become diabetogenic, causing these chronic diseases of metabolism, then we need to address those particular things. And the way to address that is with chelation. And chelation comes from the Latin word claw, and it's something that grabs on. So it chelates the metal. This is the chelator. This is the metal. It binds it and removes it from the body. So some chelators are oral, some are IV, nutritional support, again, whether that's oral or IV. And each chemical has its best chelator in its best form. Cadmium, for example, there isn't an oral chelator that works. Many people talk about that as an option, but in truth, in studies, we don't have an oral chelator. Oral chelation works really, really well with mercury, works moderately well with lead. And with mercury, it works better than IV chelation. So there's the best medication for the type of metal that you have and the best form that it's in. And it's different for all of the metals and the best way to test them. So it's a tricky field. If you are working on heavy metals, you want to make sure that you are working with a practitioner who's very well versed with what we call kinetics. Where do these chemicals store? What are their half-lives? Like arsenic. We have lots of arsenic in Northern California where I live. And it's got a very, very short half-life and basically is in and out of our body within 3 to 5 days. So the only strategy, we don't need to chelate arsenic if it's high. The only strategy we need is to figure out where we're being exposed and avoid it. It's almost always in water, can be in our drinking water. People think about that, but then they may not think when they fill the tea kettle or the pot that water also should not have, tap water in it with the chlorine or the metals and the arsenic being the biggest kind of issue. So you want to work with someone who is very well versed in those dynamics so that you get the proper treatment if your metals are high and the proper testing to really assess that appropriately. Okay, so these are the 7 strategies: avoidance, daily detox, rest, a liver flush, maybe, I don't know, 3 times a year, a seasonal cleanse once or twice a year, balance the flora, and address any underlying heavy metals that may occur. And why would you do that? Because you want to flatten the curve. It's not just about lifespan. It's really about health span. And you can see what we're seeing. I would move this curve further over. This is an old chart. We're seeing declining health way back here in teenagers and even younger. And the highest growing incidence of obesity is in newborns. Now, there's not a lot of fat born, you can't. This is where it's like, okay, think about it, people. We can't blame a newborn baby on being overweight because they're lazy and they eat junk food. First they're just born, and then after that, all they do is sleep and have breast milk, and that's normal, healthy baby. So we can't say, hey, that baby's sleeping 20 hours a day. That's ridiculous. That's what babies do. And they don't get a lot of exercise. So this is affecting people of all ages. And what we want to do is flatten this curve so that our health span, this is the health span, high level of health for longer. And then, you got to exit, okay? You got to slow down. It's going to happen. And you got to exit, whether it's, in these numbers or different numbers for you. But this decline where we have decades of poor health managed with medications is what we're looking to avoid. And all the suffering and really financial impact that has on us. We need to take not only our health in our hands, but our financial health, and health can be so expensive. So we need to invest more upfront preventively and therefore have to spend less later. So next steps, you could do a personal 4-week seasonal cleanse. So this is kind of a challenge. I think I'm going to do a health challenge coming up. I've been thinking about it, so that there's a challenge here. So organic vegan diet, you want to avoid the vices. So sorry, no lovely red wine and no coffee and no refined foods. So just a really, really clean diet, and do the daily detox habits. I'm also going to share the daily detox habits with those of you who have registered for this event. You could also say, hey, I'd like some support doing all of that. What does that look like? And I am doing a cleanse. I have the books that I've written that I showed you. I recorded videos for self-study because you don't need to really listen to me talking to myself on the computer. You can do it at your leisure. Pre-recorded guided imagery, audio recordings to engage your inner healer and the healing power of your mind, weekly handouts, worksheets, and live Q&A. This is starting next week, so next Wednesday night from 5 to 6, and it'll run for 4 weeks. Cost for that is generally $197 until through the weekend. You have through the weekend to decide if you would want to do this with me to get $50 off. The supplements range around $250 to $300 depending on exactly what you get. and I will help you with those choices. Or if you are referred to this from your doctor will help you with those choices. Oops, this was, yeah, an extra slide I forgot to really erase. So questions. I know I saw something up here. Oh, maybe not. I'm not sure I have any questions. So you guys, this is your opportunity. I'm going to go ahead and stop the share so that you can see me, and I can see the questions. That definitely helps. I'm going to open my screen a little bit and go back to those questions. Great. Okay, so trying to navigate a specific system. When I'm in a new car, a new car. I love the new car story, because new cars are really problematic, or new furniture. There's some stuffiness, so ear closes up, sinusitis accompanies. And then that goes on to a real problem. Yes, so a new car, one of the most toxic things that you can get exposed to is a new car. And it takes about 2 years for a car to fully off gas. Some people are very sensitive to new cars and some people are less sensitive. So you may have 2 people in a car and one person's doing totally fine and the other person has such brain fog, they can't remember where they're going, and can be very, very serious. So that person is more sensitive to solvents. So a new car is the biggest litmus test of that. I recommend when you buy a vehicle that you buy a 2-year-old vehicle rather than buying a new one. You can off gas them. You can put them out in the sun closed all day, and then not you, but someone else who's not sensitive can then open the windows of the car and air out all night. So you can speed up that off gassing. You could do that for the house as well. You know, certainly pick a low toxic paint, but there's nothing like non-toxic paint is not actually a real thing. So you're going to have some off gassing from that. And so you're going to want to heat the house with it closed, open it and air it several times. And that helps. Yeah, avoidance is really, really difficult. And if your barrel gets full, then that least little exposure that you're having is overflowing your barrel. And that, you know, avoiding becomes very, very difficult because it's everywhere. So what you need to do is lower your barrel. The first thing that you can do is a seasonal cleanse. For a lot of people, that's really, really significant. Other people need to work with an environmental medicine doctor. I'm an environmental medicine doctor. I run a nonprofit. It's called the National Association of Environmental Medicine, and it does have a list of doctors all over the country and in Canada that people can see. So getting a good environmental medicine doctor to help you identify what your ongoing exposure. The other thing that can happen in an old car is it can have a exhaust leak. And so that's a problem. There may be something in your food that you're exposed to that you hadn't thought of. It may be that you have allergies. One of the things we're seeing that's really problematic is we're having a lot of biosurgery, right? People have a lot of plates, a lot of joints, a lot of titanium. And titanium is very highly allergenic. And so of course, this person's constantly having their immune system triggered by this titanium because it's in their bodies. Then their barrel gets very full, then they get very sensitive, and the electromagnetic can resonate with that metal in their bodies, causing even more problems. So these biologic surgeries that we have can be a real problem for some people. There are ways, there's a great place in Texas. I wish there were more places, but there's amazing, my colleague and board member, Stephanie McCarter, runs a center for desensitization in Dallas, Texas. And so there's a multiple series of shots to desensitize to someone, and then often they can tolerate those exposures. So you need to find out what you're being exposed to and what's really causing the problem, lower your body burden, avoid the big triggers, and then treat anything endogenous. So if it's in your body, you may need help from an environmental medicine doctor to be able to get that out of your body, which you could do after a cleanse. A cleanse would be safe. It's real food. And so that would be the place to start. And yeah, it's that crazy making, you know, it's so hard because we don't recognize these symptoms as being real as a culture. And so family, friends, you know, people out on the street can be very critical of our experiences if we're having a hard time with a chemical exposure. So that's the first step of knowing that you're not crazy. So super important to work on that emotional piece and get the support that you need. I've done many cleanses and have a very balanced diet, but specific weird symptom. Yeah, so that could be, I put in the chat. Oh, do I see things in the chat? I couldn't find, I am in the chat. Okay, well, maybe I'll see what the symptom is, but we just have to put, doctors have a differential diagnosis. And what that means is when a person comes in with symptoms, we can say, oh, you know, this looks like this. So this is what we're going to call it. And we have to give it a diagnosis so we can start thinking about treatment. Now, I like to throw diagnosis out the window and really work on a person's resilience and get their system in balance, because if a person has their system in balance, they have enough nutrients, their toxic load is low enough, their body can heal itself. And we don't necessarily need to know even what caused it, but we need to understand where these deficiencies might be coming from and how to correct them and what testing may be important to do that. And we need to work on the body burden. So many really, really good doctors, including alternative care doctors, are really addressing the nutrient, and somebody's in excess and they're just trying to catch up. And then you're up here in some sort of weird balance that doesn't really bring a person health and wellness. Okay, what brands of air purifiers do you highly recommend for anyone, asthmatics, but really for anyone? So IQ Air is excellent. Blue Air is excellent. Austin Air is really good. It's not quite as high a quality as those, but it gets a lot of the fine particulate. You need to get that PM2, the particulate that is pollution, is air pollution. That's what you need to filter out. So a HEPA filter does not do that. Sometimes a HEPA filter, if it really is pollen that you're dealing with, is enough for asthmatics. But if you're going to invest in purifying your air, I would really work with something that has a fine filter. So the Austin Air is definitely the least expensive, really good quality. There's other ones coming out. Those are the ones I know. IQ Air, Blue Air are a couple of the big companies that are very, very reliable that I know of. Okay. So the symptom being specific chemicals. Yeah, we do. So one of the things that's important to understand when we're talking about toxicity is, yes, there's this degree of what is our exposure. Super important to know, like what level of exposure is my system, like literally just being overwhelmed because I am exposed to so much chemicals and it's storing in my body and I'm being exposed again and again to my endogenous stores. The other thing we need to think about is who are we? Who are we genetically? And there are many, many detox pathways in the liver, and the liver does so much work for us for our detoxification. And we can have genetic weaknesses in there, those areas. They can be more often what they're the newer kind of genetic work that we're starting to understand in the last 20 or 30 years, which are the single nucleotide polymorphisms. And those are just little misspellings in a gene that makes it work either faster or slower. And that can affect our ability to detoxify. And we have two phases. We have phase 1 and we have phase 2, and we have toxic intermediates in between. And so some people are exposed to a chemical and have a genetic situation where that chemical, that specific chemical, increases metabolism, induces metabolism phase 1, but doesn't change phase 2. And what that does is create a lot of toxic intermediates. So it's getting stuck in this free radical place because phase 2 cannot process it. So that's that supportive phase 2. So when we understand what chemical, we can think, oh, is that on a methylation pathway? Is that on a glutathione pathway? Is that on a sulfur pathway? What pathway would deal with that particular chemical? And so that's where an environmental medicine doctor can help, like, oh, this is the part of your detox system. After just kind of generally lowering your barrel with a seasonal cleanse, then the next layer is to say, well, what do we think you're exposed to? And this is often a needle in a haystack. There's 90,000, I mean, there's eight, oh, let's just talk eight. There's 8,000 high volume chemicals. We have tests for about 200. So we can't test for them. So it's a series of asking lots of questions. There's a questionnaire to answer to kind of help your doctor sift out what that might be that you're exposed to. And then once we know that, then we have a better idea of what that treatment is. And sometimes we don't know. Sometimes we cannot find the needle in the haystack for whatever reason that is. And then we experiment with different therapeutics and we say, okay, what helps this person feel better? There are other biomarkers we can look at, like basic blood tests. We can look at the lipid balance. We can look at liver enzymes, high sensitivity CRP, even white blood cells and red blood cells and platelets can tell us a lot about what's going on with that person's detox system, so we can monitor it. And so that's how we have to go about it. If we can't actually, put our finger on the dot, then we're going to say, okay, well, we'll use some of these strategies and then we'll see, are you doing better? And no, if you do have a chemical sensitivity, that this is a process and it generally takes 6 months to 2 years. In that period of time, people feel better. People start to recover. In that period of time, people have setbacks and they feel better, and then they do too much, they expose too much, or they just are too active because they finally have the energy to do things. So it's a journey. And I think that this is something we really need to think about when we're thinking about our health. If you've got something that's been going on for a while that's chronic, it's going to take a while to unwind all of that. Okay. Mold toxification. Oh my God. And for people, houses and people, it depends on the mold. So it's important to know what mold you're being exposed to. It's also important to know, is this the mycotoxins from the mold that are making you sick, or do you have a mold allergy? So with molds, we talk about those two separate things. That can be true of chemicals. Also, I talked about that a little bit with titanium, that it's not an oxidative event. The titanium is not oxidative to tissue. That's why we use it in replacement. But you can develop an allergy to it. And so that can have that same effect on your barrel, right? Because that's one of the things that goes in the barrel. So sorting that out, testing has become more affordable. I think Vibrant America and Great Plains has the least expensive mycotoxin testing. It doesn't do any good to run one test and never test again. So that's one of the kind of challenges, is if you go down the testing road, you want to continue and do follow-up, remediation follow-up. Have you dealt with the problem? If you have Stachybotrys in your home, this is what my teacher told me. It's a little scary. He said, walk out of your house. Don't take anything with you. Pretend it burned down. Tsunami, whatever, it's gone. Nothing in it is worth having. Walk out to your car, strip your clothes off, throw them in the street, and hope your car is not toxic, and drive away and start over. Don't take your phone. Don't take your computer, because they're going to be infested. And this is what people with Stachybotrys do, is they move from house to house and they move the mold with them. Other molds are less tricky. That's the big, horrible black mold that we are seeing more and more of. Florida, just is the environment, so we don't see as much of that in California. I saw a lot of it in Southern Oregon, not a lot, but I saw it. I was surprised I saw it. So you have to test for that, and you have to have a certified mold tester. Really, I mean, there are some, there's the Ermine and the Hermine test kits that you can do. Ermine, Hermine. The Ermine, I think, is less expensive than the Hermine. So those are, if you're going to do your own tests, that would be the only way to go with that. Most mold needs water, so it's remediation of the leak that has to happen, and then someone who's trained going in and dealing with that mold to clean up the house. So it's a growing problem as we're having this climate craziness. Global warming is an interesting way to put it, but climate craziness makes a lot more sense to a lot of us. And mold is one of those side effects. You can think of like the whole planet has dysbiosis. Dysbiosis is life out of balance. We get that in our flora, in our gut, but the planet also is experiencing that, the warming of the oceans, the changing of the pH, the buildup of toxicants in our waterways. Have you heard of the company BioBalance? Vaguely, I don't know them well. Fogging and solutions that you need remediation, and different molds take different remediation. So again, remediating the leak, if it's anything but Stachybotrys, there's a leak. So that has to be done before you would kill the mold. And there are various different ways to clean it, different cleaners and different paints that can make it resistant to growing back again. Although if you really have it cleaned properly, and I would honestly, if there's mold in your house, you bring someone in who's trained. It's hard to treat a house for mold. That's a really good question. There is biological builders. I haven't actually had to access anybody since I'm doing kind of a different thing here in California than I was in Oregon, where I knew all my people. But you want to find a biological builder. They usually know someone. There's a company, and I can't think of it, that I met at a conference that I haven't used, but I really liked them. Oh, there's the guy, another company I've heard of, who I think is based in San Francisco area. He's called The Mold Guy. I think it's a brilliant name. Like, I can remember that. That's great. That didn't slip my brain. So you want them to be certified, and probably anybody who's really certified is going to be able to do the job. It's also great to work with an environmental medicine health practitioner who can help you vet these people. One of my services is helping people buy a house. What to look for, what to test, what to consider, particularly if you're chemically sensitive. Okay, great. I think we've got one more question. I'm going to take this one, and then I'm going to close the questions for the day. You should have all the links for signing up for the cleanse class. Love to see you guys there. Love running a class. I teach a lot in that course to really help people be more educated about cleansing and about toxic exposures. You can also just access the class at info@drbonnienedrow.com. That's DR, and then my name, bonnienedrow.com, and it's in that area on the shop, or follow the link that you have to get that. You can also email that address, and I can do my best. I can't answer all questions, but at least point you in the right direction. So that's a way that you can get in touch with me. That's the best way. Okay, so last question. Can EMF contribute to neuropathy? Yes, absolutely. So numbness, tingling, electrical impulses can be lots of things can disrupt that neurological pathway. But you can have electrical currents going on a pathway if you are sensitive that can cause lots of different sensations that other people will not experience. And so that's kind of a red flag to say, oh, what it could electromagnetic, am I experiencing this more in certain environments than in other environments? So that's a way to test that. If you're out camping and away from everything, do you still experience that? Or does that just happen when you are in a more electrical environment? Okay, well, really fun answering questions with you guys. You can see I'm super enthusiastic about this work. I find it very exciting and very empowering to help other people understand it better and to regain their health and vitality, or to maintain their health and vitality. So I'm going to sign off, and thank you for spending your evening with me. Take care.